You're listening to Lighthouse Conversations, brought to you by Lighthouse Haven, a spiritual home for your awakening soul. Lighthouse Conversations is a show where awakening souls gather to be inspired, connected, and enlightened. Spiritual spark plug and host Chelly Canales, that's me, will guide you through the twists and turns of your journey to a safe haven where you are finally free to live your best light. Each episode contains a conversation with a guest who has gone through a spiritual awakening, detailing their unique and life-changing experiences in an intimate and candid way. Although everyone's experience is as unique as they are, we all share one common thread. We're all seeking something. So, come join us on this journey and be prepared to leave with resources that will supercharge you into inspired action. Here's today's episode. Hello, awakening souls. I'm so happy to connect with you today. I hope you're doing something that's bringing you joy, bringing you peace, bringing you a sense of wellness, as there's a lot in the world that we cannot control, things that we just honestly have no impact on that can be, hard and challenging, and things that can affect us mentally and emotionally. But all that we really truly have control over is our reaction to things, and how we show up and how we decide to make change or make effort towards correcting those things. It's been really difficult, I think, for a lot of people during COVID-19, during isolation, during this pandemic. It's been difficult for people who have had struggles with addiction. Regular day-to-day life is already challenging. And then you throw this perfect storm of uncertainty and fear and isolation into the mix, and it can absolutely make things so much more amplified. The isolation factor, not having human connection to help us get through the things we need to get through. Luckily there are meetings that are online. You can have Zoom meetings, but missing that person-to-person interaction is a challenge. There's all that time suddenly by yourself that you didn't have before, and so the mind starts to spin, and old habits may more easily creep back in. So this is one of the many challenges that has come from this time of being isolated. I talked to author Billy Manis in this wonderful interview. He's very inspiring. He's 10 years sober now, and still, every day is working to keep it going, right? Even he has to go to Zoom meetings during these times, and he provides so much wonderful guidance in his book, Kickass Recovery. We get into that. He's got some great insight and inspiration, and I think this is a book that will truly help people right now who are looking for help. And please take a moment to listen. Billy's really inspiring, and I think that he's helping to heal a lot of people by sharing his voice and his truth. So enjoy today's episode. And welcome to the show, Billy. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing awesome. I've been familiar with your work through various places online like Elephant Journal, but you have this wonderful new book out called Kickass Recovery, From Your First Year Clean to the Life of Your Dreams. We're going to dive into that more, the book itself, as we go on, but I just want to hear about your journey towards spirituality. Was your recovery, which you talk about in the book, not only your personal story, but actually specific ways you help people to find their own, their tools for people going through something similar. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is part of recovery that I think a lot of people are challenged with, especially as soon as they come into recovery their first time. People generally, when they're initially trying to get clean, they will struggle with a lot of the spirituality that's involved in 12-step programs, and a lot of them have grudges against they'll say God. I have a problem with God, they'll say, and that is when you need to help people learn to invent a new definition of what God or spirituality is. And because you're never going to get to the first base in that situation until people start to have a workable relationship with what it is, the universe or spirituality.
Absolutely. And so I find, as I've interviewed people, that
it's always that moment. Well, not always. I would say there is a moment that comes, that dark night of the soul, that kind of rock bottom moment where you feel as far away from source as possible, when truly that turned out to be the moment when they were never closer than ever. Like, that was the moment when things started to open up in a really incredible way, and defining that spirituality for themselves at that point, realizing what it means to them, and not just like, I've always been told this is what God means and that doesn't work for me, that it's that true vulnerable connection. Can you talk me through your journey in that?
Yeah, you're right. It's very paradoxical actually when you feel like you've been neglected, when you feel like you've been abandoned by the the spirit or the spiritual or God or whatever it is you want to call it. At that moment where you feel like you're most alone is when you're being picked up off the ground. Um, and the moment that I hit that point, I was in an ambulance, and it wasn't looking good, and I had to go to a hospital that was an hour away, and they were rushing me there as quick as they could get because our local facilities did not have what they needed in order to save my life at that point. So they needed to get me to our state capital, Albany, Albany Med, which is a bigger and more illustrious hospital.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, I wasn't sure how it was all going to turn out, and I was faced with the fact that like that could be it. I was 40. I didn't get an impression from the EMTs like that they would have been completely surprised if that was it for me. Like I
Wow.
kind of felt like they were prepared for that. They weren't really too put off by it. It was just like, look, you're a 40-year-old man. You're in really bad shape. You've been using for 20 years. You know you might make it, you might not. I don't know. That was the vibe I was picking up. That could have been completely projected. I don't know, but um, I just remember, when I did feel abandoned by God at that moment, and looking back in retrospect, that was when everything changed for me, and that was when I really did become more connected to Source.
What did that look like on a day-to-day basis for you? Because recovery is not something that is, well, I just decide one day to do it and we're good. It happened. Congratulations. No, it's such a journey. It's such a process. How did that inform your recovery?
Well, what happened was I went from a very complicated life of being an addict, which I say complicated because there was just so much involved in feeding that on a daily basis. It was just so much work,
Mm.
and it was complicated to live like that, and it was going on for years, and then it all came to a screeching halt, and I was living in a boarding house room. So now I'm living in a room, no more house or apartment. Um, and I'm going to drive a taxi every day. And at the end of the day, I'm going to a meeting, and then I'm going home to go to sleep. And then I'm going to do the same thing 7 days a week.
Wow.
Things got very simple, very quick. Um, and at that point, I had a lot of time alone, and obviously I was not alone. I had the universe, something. I don't know what you want to call it. I had some kind of force that I could feel. At that point, I was referring to it as God because it was just a convenient term for me to use. Um, the more I stayed clean, the more that relationship became more complicated, and I'm not really sure what to call it at this point, but it's my connection to it has gotten so deep and profound at this point.
The beauty of it is that you don't actually have to call it anything specific. There's these old paradigms of it must look this way. You must go through this person to get to your source. You must follow these rules and regulations. And then when you just realize you're your own best source and connection to your source, that's a beautiful thing. And yeah, no name required. You know who you're talking to.
Well, there was this old man in Woodstock. I remember at one of those meetings in Woodstock. He was like an old, retired, like producer, music producer. But I remember him saying to me, "If you could wrap your head around what it is, it's no longer God."
Oh,
and
that's yes.
and He said, and he explained to me that's what makes it so magical is that it's beyond anything that a man can comprehend, or that human can comprehend.
Hmm.
Um, that's what makes it what it is. We can't put it in a box. It is something much bigger than what we're able to, you know, comprehend.
Oh, that's so true. And no one will ever know the answer. And so we, try as we might, we shouldn't feel because I know I can sometimes feel disappointed in myself for not getting things in order and say, well, this is how things are. The point is it's intangible and it's a beautiful personal connection. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. Tell me
Yeah.
about gratitude in your life. I know that that's helped you be the man that you are today. What steps do you take to display your gratitude in life?
To display my gratitude.
Well, I guess
Well,
not necessarily display, but like, how does it work in your day to day?
oh, there are. This is going to sound kind of corny, but there are moments in my day when I can get so. I'm starting to feel it now. I can get so welled up with emotion and gratitude, at just like at what I my existence right now, my reality right now. If I think about it long enough, if I sit down and think about like where I am and what I'm doing, and where I've come from since this all began, I could get very emotional very quickly. And when that's not at the forefront of my thoughts, it's still in my subconscious. So I carry it around with me wherever I go.
Gratitude is so important, especially during times like these when life is turned upside down because of COVID-19. People are isolated from each other. There's so much division in terms of what people believe is actually going on. And in fact, one of the things that worries me is being so isolated and being taken away from routines is activating the process for people who are having addiction issues, who are having mental health issues, who are having, maybe abusive relationship issues. Like being at home more is allowing those things to kind of grow because there's just more time there together. In terms of the addiction piece, have you heard of these things in your community at all? And do you have any suggestions to help out with that?
Well, I had just written an article for Elephant Journal last week about something very related to this. Is
Hmm.
somebody I guess saw one of my articles and wrote to me because the person knew that I was involved in recovery, and they had explained to me that they were so scared about COVID. They had 5 years clean. They were so scared about COVID that they went and bought heroin and
Mm.
decided that if they were to get it, they're just going to take all the heroin and they're not going to suffer through this thing. They're just going to, that's it. They're just going to complete a suicide
Oh,
and
wow.
that's it. That lasted in his house for about 48 hours. And, of course, he used all of it and then he lost his 5 years. And there was a really dumb decision to make. But the thing is like, while that's not a typical story you hear, it's indicative of what's going on right now. People are not, you know, um, even people with some years of recovery are not prepared for unprecedented events like this, where you can't go back on Google and say when was the last time we had a global pandemic? How did we handle it in
Right.
recovery? There's there's no precedent for this. So, um, and you add that to the fact that there's no human connection at meetings. There are Zoom meetings every day. In fact, there's one that goes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can log on anytime
Oh,
you want.
wow.
Yeah. And I use it as often as I can. I mean, there were nights when I was working, driving a truck, where I
Hmm.
would just leave it on my phone and listen to the people share. And everybody would, they virtually put their hand up and then, share for 4 minutes. And you would listen to people share. And like some of the stories were very sad, but that would fill you with gratitude. And some of the stories were very happy. And that would, so that is what you're looking for when you go to a meeting. Unfortunately, we all know that human connection, being around people and hugging people, and this was also an X factor that helped people to stay clean. I know it did for me. That's no longer there, and so that's the hurdle right now.
That is such a challenge. We are made to connect. We're made to receive comfort from one another, with a physical touch, with an eye connection, with just like, hey, I got you, I'm in your space. And not having that is certainly difficult at this time. How are you doing personally through all of this?
I have friends in recovery, and there have been times that I have called them while I was working and talked for an hour.
Yeah.
That is a typical thing that I will do. Um, because I'm experiencing my own stuff too,
Of
even
course.
though I'm approaching 10 years clean at this point.
Wow.
It doesn't matter, because the what precipitated my addiction was so long in the making, in so many decades, that 10 years is just like, it's a great reprieve, and it's changed my life. But all those the root of those problems, all those the trauma from my childhood that brought on those problems later in life, that stuff is still there,
Mm.
and I face it all the time, in the decisions I make or the things I experience, or so I still need help, so I still need to talk.
And it's so great that people are there for you for that. And because you do have wisdom and knowledge to share doesn't mean you don't have your own challenges as well. But I think that's part of what makes you so effective with other people in recovery, because they know you know exactly what it's like. And you're not talking at anyone, you're speaking from your heart, from your experience. So that's so valuable. I want to jump into your book then. How cathartic was it for you to be able to just put all of this out there in a book form and share it with the world?
Oh, it was incredible. The whole process was incredible, because I was, as I said, working as a truck driver every
Hmm.
day. Um, but I remember once reading Anthony Bourdain, where he was
Hmm.
explaining that he was waking up, and he was writing Kitchen Confidential, and he was going to fry scallops later in the day, all night long. And then he would come home and go to sleep and wake up early in the morning over coffee and write more Kitchen Confidential. I had that in my head, and I did exactly the same thing. It only took me 2 months, January and February of the year before last, to write this book, and I did it the same exact way. Up at 6 a.m., write, go to work, and so that was a beautiful experience. I do remember there was a time when I was writing about positivity, where I was struggling with some things. And I remember there was this hypnotist that I knew, also living in Woodstock. I know a lot of very wise older guys in Woodstock but I remember calling him and saying that I felt sort of like an imposter. Here I am, writing about, staying positive, or ways to stay positive, or, and I'm like, cursing at the guy in front of me, and like, in the car in front of me. Um, and I remember he had said, there is nobody more perfect for what you're trying to do than you right now, because the person who just learned something is the most perfect person to teach something.
I 100% agree with that. It just makes it real. It makes it, I know I connect with those teachers the most. And that's, it's been something that has held me back as well in the stuff that I'm putting out into the world. Like, I'm not perfect. I don't have it together. Who does? And if you have the illusion that somebody does, it's just not true anyway. We're always working through something. I
Yeah.
wish I didn't hold people back so much, There'd be so
No,
much
I mean,
more to share.
I remember even writing it in the book and saying, listen, I struggle with this stuff. I have this gravity on me a lot, where my default setting is to want to feel, a negative feeling, or get angry, or, but like, these are the tools that I use, you know.
And the tools are great tools, and you have a really nice balance between sharing your personal story and giving some ideas of how people can help get out of their own way, is something you talk about. But before I get into that, I want to ask you, just for my own self, because I'm a writer as well, and I have I have some book proposals going. I've got things going. There's a lot I want to do to help, but the thing that stops me in my tracks in fear is sharing in such a raw, personal level, like this is my life experience. I mean, you put it all out there. What helped you to be able to say, no matter what, I'm going to stand here in my truth and I'm going to share it with you?
I started writing for Elephant Journal, and one time I wrote something that was complete bullshit, and it just sat there. One time, the next time, I think I was sweating and I was shaking and I was scared,
Mm-hmm.
and I hit send anyway. And I remember getting like 25 emails from people telling me I made them cry, and did like, and and it was like positive reinforcement. I realized at that moment that like, it is only when I get to that point where I'm petrified of what I'm doing that I realize I'm tapping into that place that's going to do anything for anybody at all.
Oh, I totally recognize that feeling right before you hit enter, hit post, hit send. And it's just like, they're going to kill me. They're going to hate me. Someone, it's just these very irrational fears. And then the love that comes from it, the outpouring of like, I'm so glad somebody said that. Thank you for sharing that. Then it makes it all worth it, doesn't it? And in the long run, what does it matter if somebody judges you for sharing too much or they don't like what you share? We're not for everybody. We don't have to make everybody like us. Clearly,
oh no,
I
it
have a
came back
problem.
and haunted me many times. I mean, I would like, I'd be on like dating sites, and I'd like go out and
Yep.
one or two dates, and like and I would know exactly when they found my articles on the internet, because then all of a sudden it became like, I think it's better if we just, because like, yeah, I mean, it will come back and haunt you. But I remember thinking to myself, even though I would get sad about it once in a while, I remember thinking to myself, when I find the right person, they're not going to care about any of this stuff
You are
that
so
I'm
right.
doing.
If they are
And
turned off by the article, then how are they supposed to have a life with you, right? Then that's just weeding them out, right?
exactly. And it was one of those things where like my initial reaction was anger or sadness, or
Yeah, understand.
feeling, rejected. But that intellectual part of me in the back of my brain knew that it would be a crucible for who I would finally meet. And when I did finally meet somebody, um exactly that. They didn't care that I was in recovery. They didn't care about all the stuff I shared. They didn't care about anything. And that was the perfect person.
That's how it is, and who cares about the other people? I mean, they are so welcome to their journey and they should have it, and they should be true to themselves and saying, I'm not comfortable with this because it's not doing them any favors and it's not doing you any favors. So everything works out.
Exactly.
Mm. So let's go back, so you went through that personal story and you shared that, but you also have a lot of great tips for people. If you were to say, I Cliff's Notes version, maybe, like, what's your favorite thing in the book that you love to share with people in terms of how they can help themselves through recovery?
I would, let's see. Well, first of all, I would say goal setting. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
or the thing that I refer to as the precedent effect, where like that was what changed my entire life was, um, as silly as it sounds, drugs were a major thing, but as silly as it sounds, when I quit smoking cigarettes, which sat in the back of my mind is the thing that I could never do. Um, Once that precedent took place, once I did what I felt was the impossible thing, which was to put down cigarettes and be done with them. Um, at that point, I seriously felt like there was nothing on this earth that I couldn't do, and everything changed at that point. That's when I learned how to drive a truck. That's when I first started publishing on Elephant Journal. It was just one goal after another, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was only after I had quit smoking cigarettes, the most seemingly innocuous
Mm-hmm.
decision, um, turned out to be like the one that changed everything.
It's like backing up that truck into the dock, right? You got to do it a few times.
Exactly.
And that
Exactly.
one thing like made it all work for you, right? Because that was the missing piece. Wait, in
Exactly. And
terms of your
so,
driving, yeah.
yeah. And so my advice would be set a realistic goal, not an easy goal, set one that seems like you might be able to do it. And as a matter of fact, there are many people in recovery who could set the goal of trying to quit smoking cigarettes, because that is, you know, that is that thing that, I mean, a lot of people have tried and tried and tried and couldn't do. And so you have this subconscious thought where you think you're never going to be able to get out of it. And once you do, there's a shift that happens inside your body where you're like, oh, then there's absolutely nothing I can't do at this point.
Yes, then you're on your way. It's interesting how that happens, but it's like, we'll take it, right? If that's the way to do
Yeah.
it, the way it's going to be. About your book, I enjoyed the style that you told it. You know, your voice, the way you communicate is so different than a lot of the self-development books that are out there. Talk to me a little bit about your style.
Well, I would give a lot of credit to Jen Sincero, because
Mm-hmm.
she's a hero of mine. And
Yeah.
I actually stood online for 3 hours to be able to talk to her. And it was right when I had signed with my agent, and we were just like, trying to find a publisher. So I had my book, and she, asked me how I was doing, and in like 45 seconds I told her my entire life story. and and I blurted it all out, and I'm like, I just wrote this book, and I wrote it, and it's like, and it's kind of like You Are a Badass, but it's for people in recovery. And then she goes, so you stole my idea?
Yeah.
But like, yeah. So when I first read her book, I was like, this is, I read a lot of Tony Robbins and stuff
Hmm.
like that, and I love that stuff. That stuff helped me so
Yeah.
much. But when I picked up Jen Sincero, I was like, wow, here is like a snarky lady telling the same principles, but like in so much more of an entertaining way. Um, I want to write something like that for people in recovery. And so yeah, I mean, I'm not reticent to say that she inspired, her style inspired me.
Yes,
Yeah.
I feel like this is going to connect to a lot of people who don't normally reach for this type of work. I think it just makes it like this is my friend I'm having, some tea with, and just talking real, just having this real life conversation. And I think that's so much better than like, I'm lofty and I'm up here, and maybe eventually you can be like me, which, it works for some people. But this is just a whole other way of saying, you and I like can do this. I've done it. I'm working on it constantly. You can do it too, and you're not alone. That's the main thing. I think the purpose of sharing one story is so that, yes, it's healing for you, but when you put yourself out there, it just heals countless others who need to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And you're so welcome. So did you know when that nudge hit you that you're like, this has to be a book?
When I first started publishing for Elephant Journal,
Mm-hmm.
um, that was really exciting to me. It was very exciting, and the true story is, I knew a ghostwriter in Manhattan at the time, and she, for work, she would help people put together their book proposals. This is the So she was telling me, she was complaining to me one day about how, she helped this person who just hired her to write her book proposal, get a book deal, and she can't even get her own book deal. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting there listening to her, and I'm half listening to her and half scheming in my head, thinking, so I could probably put together a book proposal, you know, and that's when I knew the mechanics of how something like that gets done. And once I knew, once I could see a little bit of light, I just tore it open. I saw an opening for myself, and I was like, I'm gonna do this no matter what. And I just needed to know what the mechanics were. And once I had heard, I know I was supposed to be a sympathetic ear, but I was actually, I was developing a strategy during the proposal.
Hey, multitasking's all right. That's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, it's great.
You can
Yeah,
do both.
I'm sure I served my purpose there.
That's wonderful. And because you did that, it just took that moment, and look at where you are now. Do you have other books down the road, do you think you'd like to write?
Yes, a lot of the relationship stuff that I write for Elephant Journal is like, gets very, people find benefit in it. And I know that really deep in my heart, that's the stuff that I love writing about. So I want to write a relationship book at some point.
I'm sure you will. I have no doubt it's going to be coming out, and everybody will keep an eye out for it. Before we learn about how people can learn more about you and all of your work, is there anything you'd like to share about the book that's just something from your heart you'd like to give to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that well, I used to do what's known as service, where you would go and bring NA meetings, and I used to do service in our county jail, and so I kind of improvised. You know, you were supposed to go in there and tell your story, and then let other people share their experiences. Um, and what wound up happening was I would tell my story of how I learned how to drive a truck and how I went from making $300 a week to $1,000 a week, and I would notice as I was getting ready to leave, these guys would all be standing in a line in front of me, waiting to talk to me. They all wanted to know how I did what I did, and they wanted, and they were all getting out relatively soon. They were just in jail; they weren't in prison. They all wanted to do the same thing, and I remember driving home one day after one of those meetings and thinking, you know what? There are so many people in this world who don't realize that they can be taking home $1,000, $1,100 a week by just going to this 6-week class and learning this thing. And me, who was like a round peg in a square hole in that industry, because I totally, I'm a poet. I'm not a truck driver, but I learned anyway. And if I can do it, anybody could do it. Because I mean, I was scared to death of that thing, but I learned it. And once I got a taste of what it was like to be financially independent, it precipitated more recovery and more gratitude, and and it got me out of lack, and it just made me more valuable to the people around me. That is what I wanted to do with this book, is to inspire people to get out of lack and to love themselves and to be financially independent for themselves. Not ridiculously wealthy, just enough to not worry about stuff.
And you do provide some great resources for help with these vocational skills, getting funding for them if you've been through recovery or you're going through recovery. So, I mean, you don't just say, oh, anyone can do it. You actually say, here's some actual steps you can take to do it. So that's fantastic. I love it. So how can people get a hold of you in terms of your work? Where can they get the book and read your articles, all that good stuff?
Well, the book is available at any of the, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target.com, any of those places you can get the book. Just, look up Kickass Recovery. And you can write to me anytime, BillyManis.com, and I always answer my email.
That is fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing time with me today. It's so great to hear your story, get to know the man behind the book and the articles, and, just keep doing what you're doing and sharing your truth, because you're making a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Thank you. And I loved your TED Talk.
Oh, you watched it. Thanks.
Yes.
Oh, that means a lot to me. Thank you. Wow. Well, I appreciate your feedback on that.
Very inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Lighthouse Conversations. If this show resonates with you, it would mean so much to have you rate, review, and share. Don't forget to follow us at chellycanales.com and on social media.